The BBC is going to BBC. Following everything that has been done to Doctor Who, not just over the last few years, but even now as we speak, they decided that the work of Agatha Christie should be next. Reacting to the audience abandoning Doctor Who in droves during the Bag-Lady years, the showrunners decided to bring them back by bringing back David Tennant. And I have much more to say about him and the act of cultural vandalism he helped perpetrate upon Jules Verne's Around the World in 80 Days. Let me know in the comments if you want to see that video. But back to Doctor Who. Naturally, the return of the most popular Doctor in recent history was just a bait and switch, which Tennant aided and abetted, because there was no way the modern-day BBC would ever go back to what Doctor Who always was and used to be. That would be tantamount to admitting the failure of their D.E.I. in entertainment strategy, and you would have to fire everyone from senior management and down before they would do something like that. So instead, they did a bait and switch with David Tennant, all while doubling down in every way imaginable. Even to the point of reimagining Doctor Who's most iconic villain, because the able-bodied but virtue-signaling showrunners decided on the unsolicited behalf of wheelchair users everywhere that Davros was offensive to them. And to top it off, they saw fit to rewrite history and portray Isaac Newton as an Indian. Now, there apparently were some clowns out there who were offended that anyone would take issue with reimagining what they thought was a fictional character as an Indian. And if any of those should happen to be watching, let me disabuse you of that notion right away. Isaac Newton was very much so a historical figure, in that he was the father of modern physics. We know what he looked like, and it wasn't like this. There's a sad irony here though. While I won't claim to be a fan of Doctor Who per se, in fact, the only Doctor Who I've ever seen was the origin of the Dalek storyline, which was fantastic. But I do believe one of the original purposes of the show was to be educational and teach British children about history in a vibrant and entertaining manner. It is a sad state of affairs then, that Doctor Who today has done a 180 on that, and instead resorted to rewriting history in the name of D.E.I. doctrine. Alas, this is a toxic doctrine that not even the ones it at face value would appear to be designed to include appreciate. Case in point, The Verge found the specials released thus far to be racist and offensive, because there was just too much whitey David Tennant in it, while the new Doctor played too much into racial stereotypes. In short, in their effort to make Doctor Who inclusive and for everyone, the BBC made Doctor Who exclusionary, divisive, offensive, and for no one. But rather than learning from this though, the BBC is going to BBC and give another hallmark of British culture a D.E.I. makeover. That finally brings us to the real topic of this video, namely the BBC's upcoming adaptation of Agatha Christie's Murder is Easy. For those who might not be familiar with her, Agatha Christie is one of the greatest authors of all time. The creator of both Poirot and Miss Marple, she is perhaps the most prolific author of whodunit crime mysteries. I even rate her slightly above the also excellent Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, author of Sherlock Holmes. My personal feelings on that aside, the BBC is adapting Murder is Easy, one of her lesser-known works, and surprise surprise, they decided to give it a D.E.I. makeover. The protagonist, originally a retired police officer, Luke Fitzwilliam, has now been reimagined as a young black man. Anticipating exactly how well this is going to go down, the entertainment media complex has already started running cover for it. In an interview with the UK's Radio Times magazine, James Pritchard, Agatha Christie's great-grandson and current overseer of her literary legacy, claimed that Christie herself would have approved of modern-day revisions to her written works, arguing that she felt that early adaptations of her work didn't go far enough in putting their stamp on her work. His exact words were, and I quote, "The first few adaptations of her plays were done by other people, and she didn't like them because she didn't think they were radical enough for the change in medium. She recognized that when you shift the medium, you need to shift the story. I also believe these are adaptations, not translations, and you are looking at the story from where you are now, 90 years after this was first written. This is all true and well, and I have no principal objections to anything he is saying here. Remember, he is now the caretaker of the Agatha Christie legacy. It is his job to keep pushing for more adaptations of her work, as it is those adaptations that will help future generations discover her original stories. Case in point, one of the most underrated movies of this year was A Haunting in Venice, the third Poirot adaptation to star Kenneth Branagh. It did exactly the kind of adaptation that Pritchard is speaking of, and it did it with great success, at least creatively. Financially is a different matter, because Disney dropped the ball big time when it came to advertising and promoting it, but check the movie out if you haven't seen it, it is quite good. Getting back to the story at hand though, just like Pritchard advocated taking some liberty in adapting Christie's work into other mediums, Deadline Hollywood took some liberty in adapting his words for their headline, because as far as I can tell, he never used the exact words Agatha Christie would have approved of young black hero in latest BBC adaptation. If he did, I'm sure Deadline Hollywood would have put it in the main body of their article, which they didn't, which in turn means that headline is them paraphrasing in an attempt to run cover. Maybe Christie would have been okay with a black lead if there was a very good story reason for it. I'm not saying that she wouldn't. But alas, chances are there was no story-driven or creative reason to do this. Knowing how the BBC operates, I think we can safely conclude this was a D.E.I. initiative, mandated to be placed upon the production before even a page of script had been written. Let's illustrate that with another movie, namely the Titanic. No, not the 1997 James Cameron film, and not the 1958 film A Night to Remember either. I am talking about the German 1943 version of the Titanic. In this adaptation, every Brit is a bumbling twat that arrogantly steers the Titanic into disaster. The only sensible character is the hero, a German crewman who is on top of everything, warns everyone of the impending doom, and acts a true hero till the bitter end. This character was of course made up for the movie, and it wasn't a creative decision to put him in there. No, just like is the case here, that was a prerequisite placed upon the production before even a page of script had been written. For the 1943 Titanic is a German propaganda film. That completely irrelevant sidetrack aside, Deadline Hollywood then referenced the Radio Times interview with the star of this Agatha Christie adaptation, David Johnson, who said, "I was a little bit unsure. It's the first time an Agatha Christie has had a young black hero. However," he adds, "it's marvelous that someone like me can be judged on my acting merit to do something so traditional." Well, I got bad news for you, Mr. Johnson. You weren't hired for your acting merit. You were hired because the casting call explicitly specified young black man and no one else. Of course, of all the young black actors that showed up to the audition, I presume he did win the role based on his acting merit and suitability for the producer's envisioned reimagination. But let's not pretend there was an open casting call for any actor of any age or any ethnicity. They were very specific about what they were looking for here. He then continued saying the quiet part out loud. And by making that small change, we make a large change. It's bold, but more people are willing to take risks. That part, of course, does speak to the intention behind making this change in the first place. As for the BBC, this adaptation was never about doing Agatha Christie justice. Just like the powers behind that German 1943 Titanic film weren't really all that interested in the Titanic story itself. Regardless of what he may feel about it in private, Agatha Christie caretaker James Pritchard has no choice but to support this production in public. He is, after all, trying to get more Agatha Christie adaptations made, chief among them more Kenneth Branagh Poirot after Disney botched the release of the last one, and that is a venture I fully support. Meanwhile, I don't think what is being done to Murderous Easy will be helpful, because the audience are smart enough to recognize that there's no genuine creative reason behind this stunt casting, but a toxic DEI initiative, and that will taint what, for all we know, might otherwise be a great adaptation. Let me know your thoughts on this, and if you want me to do that David Tennant video, in the comments.